Everything is personal right here. Everything is personal right here.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another episode of Everything is Personal. And our guest today is Bob Martin. How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate you doing this. I mean, we were talking earlier about your fascinating life story. I'm curious, what inspired you to create a wise and happy life?
Yeah, well, it actually kind of comes out of some of my Buddhist learnings. One of my heroes is the Dalai Lama. And one of the reasons that he is my hero is because I remember one time he was asked the question, Your Holiness, the Chinese have taken so much. They invaded your land. They caused you to be in exile. They have destroyed your temples. They are destroying your culture. They're putting up malls on your sacred grounds. How can you always be so cheerful? And his response was, yes, they have taken so much. Why should I allow them to take my happiness?
Yeah, it's
And
beautifully
and
said.
and I just thought if there's somebody out there in the world that can look at life like that, maybe I can move forward just a little bit and bring some into my life. And then he also talks a lot about what happiness is. Is it just joy? Is it the feeling of getting a new car or the smell of a new car, which will fade? Or does it have something to do with purpose and meaning? Does it have something to do with being of service, of living a life that's dedicated to something that's greater than yourself? Are these the things that make you profoundly happy? And so that's where that came from. Now, the wisdom part came because in Buddhist teachings, ignorance is one of the things that creates most of our discomfort in life, not knowing stuff. A lot of people like to put their head in the sand. They don't want to know about the news because everything I look and listen to on the news makes me upset. But they don't realize that it's even more upsetting not to know what's out there or not to know who's going to come up behind you and whack you from behind. And so that sense of not knowing or not being familiar, it creates suffering and it creates stress. And so we want to create a certain kind of knowledge that is not only head knowledge, but heart knowledge as well. And that's what we call wisdom. So I think those are the two elements of life that, so I called my webpage Wise and Happy Life.
Yeah, I love that. And I had the privilege and the pleasure of going to two Dalai Lama birthday parties.
Mm-hmm.
The energy, like you meet people, but I felt like he was speaking to me, even though he was speaking to a crowd of people. There was complete engagement with his eyes. And I'm like, how does a person look at every single person and engage with them with that energy? And it was just such a motivating and inspiring thing. And it's interesting because, I used to do a lot of personal coaching for myself and also, helping other people. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things I really got into is like Tony Robbins stuff. So I would
Yeah,
go to
yeah,
all the
yeah.
Tony Robbins events and all that stuff. And he talked about, you mentioned some people are ignorant, some people want to know, some people don't want to know. He talked about these basic human needs and what drives us. And some people are driven by this, by certainty, having certainty in their
Mm-hmm.
life. And if they're not getting the certainty in their life, they're not happy. Well, you're never going to have full certainty in your life because nothing is guaranteed. So you're already set yourself up for failure.
Mm-hmm.
There's even us, today the audience doesn't know this, but we sort of had a little bit of a hiccup. And I said, you know what? Let's just go with the flow and see what happens with it. And some people, are very comfortable and they're getting uncomfortable, getting out of that routine, getting out of certainty
Mm-hmm.
makes them uncomfortable, which actually affects their mood and happiness. Instead of controlling the mood and happiness, they let the environment, control it for them. What action can you take to overcome that if you're one of those people?
Hmm. Well, that certainty comes into that broad spectrum of wanting. We want stuff. And, if that wanting is, if we're flexible about that, if we understand that it's okay to want, but we don't want to get attached to it, because if we don't get, then, we don't get. But it's that wanting where it becomes important to us, like things like certainty and perfection.
Mhm.
In my classes, I have a lot of perfectionists, and they're just miserable folks. I don't mean to say that to your audience who are perfectionists, but it's
They're
true.
not, it's so true because I have that around me in my environment all the time, and they're
Mhm.
always getting ready to get ready. You're absolutely correct.
And double thinking and worried and projecting catastrophe and the like. And it's a difficult life to lead.
Yeah.
And I think, when it comes to spiritual or philosophical matters, and the like, there's a lot of teaching around being generous, being kind, being loving, and all the like. And so many people think that those things are taught so that people will become better people, and or they'll make a better world. But the fact of the matter is those things are taught by philosophers and spiritual leaders only so that you can be happy. They're not taught to make a better world, which will happen. They're not taught to make you a better person, which will happen. They're taught so that you can lead a happy life. And so, to answer the question about the not perfection, I'm sorry, but what was it that people wanted? They wanted, oh, stability, consistency, and the like.
Certainty. Yeah, certainty.
Certainty. They want certainty.
Yeah.
So, the we have to look at what the antidote is to that, and then we have to intentionally cultivate the antidote. Because what brain science teaches us is that, if I could just diverge a second, the right side of the prefrontal cortex holds our sympathetic nervous system, fight, flight, tension, stress, negativity, suspicion. All of that stuff is over on the right side of the prefrontal cortex. The left side is the rest and digest part, and it holds hope, creativity, sense of connection, faith, those things. Well, brain science has shown that you cannot intentionally reduce the electrical activity on the right side of your brain. Cannot be done. You can't make yourself feel less afraid. But you can intentionally increase the electrical activity on the left side of the brain. So we find that by cultivating the antidote, you actually mitigate the problem.
Yeah,
So
it's
what
sort
would
of
be the
not having two thoughts at the same time, right? If you're having that thought, you can counter that thought with something like gratitude, correct?
right?
Something like that.
Right. Like hope and fear can't exist at the same time. Not,
Right.
so what would be the, I don't know, what would be the antidote to the need for certainty?
Excitement. It's uncertainty. So if you're doing something that excites you, you
Hmm.
get out of that certain, I need to be in my place in my comfort zone, do something exciting and fun. Now you're counteracting that certainty, maybe.
Exactly. And if you go to a therapist, cognitive behavioral therapy and desensitization
Yeah.
is all about stepping out. Like, if you need certainty, then let's call it the opposite. We'll call it adventure.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, if I can phrase this lack of certainty as I'm going on an adventure, then it shifts. It's like, if you say I have to go to work tomorrow,
Hmm.
it's one mindset. If you say I get to go to work tomorrow, it's a completely different mindset.
Yeah.
And everything that happens flows from that differently. So these are the things we have to cultivate, the positive side, in order that it governs the negative side.
Yeah. So, Bob, I'm going to go
Yeah.
into a little bit into your origin story,
Okay,
if you
sure.
don't mind. Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in kind of around. we My dad was I guess I have to start there. He was born in 1898, just to give you a time frame. And he was Hungarian royalty. And when the Bolsheviks invaded Hungary, all of his ancestors were killed. He escaped. My mom was Roma Gypsy, and everybody, wiped them out. So my parents came here, and they were looking to make the American dream. And my father discovered popcorn, and he said to my mother, "These I can sell. There is nobody that would not like these." And so they started a popcorn business, and we traveled in my first few years in a carnival. We went around, and we were the popcorn trailer. And then later on, when I was 10, my father started out in an amusement park in Rockaway, Queens, New York.
It's New York.
And then he went on the road. Then he came back to that amusement park. So I grew up in on the beach, boardwalk, selling popcorn and hot dogs in Rockaway, New York. And then in the summers, I mean, in the winters, we would go to Florida and do county fairs.
Yeah.
So I kind of grew up between them. And I grew up, and by the time I was in college, I my ambition in life was to sell enough hot dogs in the summer to not have to work in the winter.
Can I
Yeah,
rewind a little bit? So,
sure.
Brooklyn, my family, my grandma lived on Third and Brighton Beach
Ah, yeah, yeah,
in
yeah.
Brooklyn. So,
So you're
uh,
right down the road from
yeah,
Coney Island, right?
exactly, Coney Island. Yeah. So I used to. I'm from Philly.
Uh-huh.
Actually, I was born in Lithuania, also an
Hey,
immigrant.
Jim's, man.
Yeah, exactly. So we go there. I spent summers at my grandma, so I'm really familiar with that. What was the family dynamic? Is you do you have siblings? Were
I
your
have
parents
one
together?
brother.
Hmm.
I have one brother that's 8 years older. So we kind of almost grew up as single as what is single kids,
Yeah, it's
whatever
like
that.
latchkey kids. You're by yourself. That's
Well,
what.
I mean, he was in a different age group. I mean, when I was
Okay.
10, he was 18. When I was 8,
Oh,
he
you
was
guys are
16.
much older.
So
Yeah,
we grew up in different circles. So it was
got it.
almost like we were only children, both two
Got
only kids in the thing. But my dad was, just, I mean, I have a heroes wall in my office here. And my dad's picture hangs there. I still see him as one of my heroes. He was a very meticulous, but not a religious man, but a very
Yeah.
meticulous and a very virtuous man.
Yeah.
Um, he wasn't big on praise, I'll tell you that, being that Germanic Eastern
Oh
European.
yeah. Oh yeah.
But a pat on the back from him, boy, I was like that dog that you throw a bone and he floats up in the
I'm
air with
still
hearts
looking
coming
at it.
out.
My dad was born in Belarus, Eastern European, and I still look for it
Yeah,
now.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
When
Right.
he's proud of me, it's like, oh yeah,
Oh,
that's
yeah,
what I
that's
live
it.
for. I don't know
That's
why,
it.
but it's still there.
No,
Oh,
it is. It is. I think all men, and one of the things that we as adults, at some point, I mean this, of course, metaphorically, but at some point, we have to kill off our dads
yeah,
and step up on the pedestal, and be our own men.
yeah, exactly.
And I don't know where that comes in life, but it's the only way that we can really be free.
So
Otherwise, we're always looking for that pat.
I was wondering. You said your goal was to sell hot dogs, etc. But
Mhm.
as a kid, did you have any like uh desires and hopes? What did you want to be? Were you more leaning towards arts or math, or did you have any like interests
Mhm.
outside of that? What were you leaning towards as a kid?
Well, I was a big boy. And back in the 50s and 60s, big boys were called husky. And J.C. Penney's had a husky department. And they were the only people that made clothes for big boys. And so I was picked on, and there was a lot of bullying by the girls and stuff. So by the time I kind of got into middle school and high school, I just wanted to be the class clown. I wanted everybody to pay attention to me. So that was that. And, growing up in an amusement park, you're kind of a carny anyway. Um, so there was that. But I'll tell you, there were two things that happened in my growing up that were significant, which I've only realized recently. One was I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I fell in love with Atticus Finch, the lawyer who stood up for Tom, and so clearly an innocent man inside of the racism of this deep South. And he was such a good man that he became a mental model for me. And the other thing that I remember was real significant was I watched the musical Man of La Mancha, the story of Don Quixote, and to dream the impossible dream. And I think that made me a starry-eyed idealist. So those things I think were important in what I looked for later, and certainly they showed themselves. But and so being a big boy, I wasn't until middle school that I found out that my body had a purpose, and it was to be a defensive tackle in football.
There you go.
Being big was helpful there.
Yeah.
So I got a scholarship to Boston University, and then on October 17th of 1969 at 2 o'clock, I found out that my high school girlfriend was breaking up with me, and 3 days later, I had a career-ending injury. But who's counting, right? It was
Yeah.
only December 17th at October 17th at 2 o'clock. Yeah. And I flunked out of Boston University and wound up at food school, like I say. But somebody kept telling me this buddy of mine kept telling me I should be a lawyer, and he actually went out and got a job and earned $350 and bought a postal money order made out to the Educational Testing Service, which was the entrance ticket to the law school aptitude test. And he goes, "You should be a lawyer. Go take the test." So I took the test. I had a mediocre college career, mediocre results, but one law school took a chance on me. And so I became a lawyer. And once I got to law school, it was like I found my groove. All of a sudden, it was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. And
Were
and
you
then,
were you a defense or a prosecutor? What side were you working on?
well, I
What?
actually, in my third year of law school, interned for Janet Reno in the DA's office in Miami during the Cocaine Cowboy days, which was the time of Scarface, that movie,
Yeah.
and Miami Vice. And it was like that. It was that vibe of Scarface is really the way Miami was in those days. It really is. And I rose up through the office pretty quickly, got to be in economic crimes, and we did a RICO case, racketeering, influence, corrupt organization, case against the mob in Miami, which and hit them for a lot of money. And I went out in private practice a little bit later, and who should come to visit me but the mobster? I'll call him Johnny. He was the Italians in Miami, the Italians and the Haitians and the Colombians and the Peruvians and the Cubans. At one level, they were all talking to each other because they all had to collaborate on routes. The Italians owned the docks in New York. And they worked with the Haitians. The stuff came out of Colombia, it shot over to Haiti, and from Haiti it went to New York. Whereas the Cubans worked with the Colombians to bring the stuff in through South Florida. And so I kind of got involved in that whole mess.
So you were defending the
At that
mobsters
point, yeah.
at that point. Is there any event, anything that happened significant where it was sort of like a little wake up call for you that got you off the path that you were on and maybe into what the purpose of your life really is?
Yeah, there was. By I graduated in 77 at 27 and spent a couple of years in the DA's office. And by 33, I had already got enough money from Johnny and his friends to pay off my house. And I was going out with them, and it was the Cocaine Cowboy days. So there was a lot of cocaine around. I was doing some drugs. I was hanging out with them. I was thinking I was the cat's meow, the big potato, nothing could hurt me. And my personal life was going down the tube. So I was seeing a therapist, and I came to this real important crossroads. So I asked my therapist what I should do. And up till then, he was just, regular therapist. All of a sudden, he pulls out a few coins and he starts throwing them and figuring out math and drawing lines on a piece of paper. And I'm thinking, excuse my language, WTF, right? What the is going on here? And I'm thinking I'm paying this guy $65 an hour. And then all of a sudden he comes up with a number like 32, and he opens up a book to chapter 32. He shows it to me, and the title chapter is Retreat. And I curse him out and I stomp out of the office, but I couldn't get the word out of my mind. I knew I had to pull back. So I started pulling back. I invested in some businesses that were hemorrhaging money, went in, cut that off, stopped it, started paying back people I owed money to, didn't stop the drugs, and started putting my life back together. And what I found out was that my therapist happened to be a disciple and also the English language editor for a 72nd generation Daoist master from the Shaolin Temple. The Shaolin Temple's Kung Fu, Tai Chi, all that stuff. And think about that, 72nd generation. I kind of figured it out. That means father to son, handing down wisdom for about 1,400 years.
Wow.
And this guy was incredible. I mean, he had an energy about him. We met, Master Nee came, and I studied under Nee and George for 8 years. And he had an energy that, I mean, when you were in his presence, you just felt you were the most important person in the world to him. And he taught us about, chi and energy. And he actually got us to hold a ball of chi in our hands and feel it and push it and feel it and play with it. And, those are the things, you can never, you can never forget those things.
Yeah.
And he suggested to us, how when we say an athlete's in the zone, that he can't do anything wrong. He just has a fantastic game. Every 3-pointer sinks, nothing but net. And then you ask him, wow, that was really great out there. And he goes, it didn't even seem like it was me.
Yeah.
So what Master Nee suggested to us is that all of life could be lived in the zone. That's what he called mastery. That you did, there's even an expression in Taoism called Wu Wei, Wuwei, which literally means doing, not doing. It means you do nothing, but nothing remains undone. In other words, without any rehearsing thoughts or without any planning, you simply are responding to everything that comes to you, but your response is perfect. That is the state of mastery. Now, so he pointed us to what that was, and I guess that set me off on a lifelong journey to move in that direction. I'm not saying that I'll ever get there. I don't think you can unless you go live in a monastery, and practice day in and day out. But to the extent that, you can make an inch or two progress, it's well worth it.
Yeah, it's the journey of it. I took a class by Stephen Kotler on flow. So, he talked about the science of flow, and there was a lot of science related to that. It's where your neurochemicals are firing at the exact amount that they should be specific to you. So it's that flow state of, you're throwing the basket into a swimming pool. And he said, there is a way to get yourself into that state. And meditation is one of them, but there's other things.
Other ways.
Right. But if you can find out where you naturally are in flow, you can prime yourself for flow and then maybe get those neurochemicals flying. So one of the things that I discovered about myself is when I go hiking, and I never even paid attention to it prior to that, it seems to be my flow state. I'm probably more than one, but that seems to be my flow state because I'm actually not thinking, but the best ideas just flow through. And then I stopped. It's like musicians were like, a song just came through me out. And I started thinking about that so I get my phone after the fact and I take notes because these amazing thoughts have entered my brain where I wasn't even trying to think of that. So if you want to get a resolution for something, that flow is amazing. I want to go back. I want to talk about this a little bit more. And the Wu Wei, I think you mentioned
Wu Wei.
Wu Wei. I want to go back to this moment you had, and you try to make a change in your life. What we know from the mob and movies and all that other stuff, it's not that easy to just walk away from things, is it? Was there any sort of conversation, any conflict that you needed to have with your guys?
So Johnny's son, not his son, I'm sorry, his son-in-law, who it's funny, his son-in-law, of course, was Sicilian. His daughter, of course, is Sicilian. When they got married, they sent him over to Sicily to get married. Then they went to New York to have a reception. Then they came back down to Miami and had a huge dinner that I was invited to. But anyway, that young man got busted with a 15-year felony, mandatory minimum. And up until then, our agreement was nothing illegal, nothing unethical, because you need to have a lawyer that's respected by the courts and is trusted by the courts. The moment, you can build your reputation your whole lifetime, and one moment you lose it. And so I told him, never, never, that reputation's important to you and it's important to me. So it was cool. But when his son got arrested, no, you're going to coach this witness to say this, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And I wasn't going to do it. So we just so happened that my ex-wife still had family in New York, and I was driving her up there, and we passed through North Carolina in the springtime. The azaleas were out, and the dogwoods were blooming. And I looked at her and I said, "Hey, what do you say we move here?" And she goes, "Okay." So I go back and I tell Johnny, I'm going to move to North Carolina. And he looked at me without a blink, and he goes, "I understand. Sometimes a man has to move on. This way we can part friends." Because he knew the pickle that I was in. He understood it. Now, see, if he even hired another lawyer to do it, under the lawyer's code, I'd be ethically bound to report it. And that put me into a big pickle. So I just needed to leave. But the miracle of it was that when I got to North Carolina, small town, North Carolina, big culture shock, but it was a fresh canvas. I could rewrite my life. And studying under Master Ni for 8 years, I wasn't the same person that I was when I first met Johnny. So rather than looking for fame and power and money, all I wanted to do was to be of service. And so I went back and I started over as a little assistant district attorney in a small town prosecutor's office, and eventually started going out and representing. I only took on either public or indigent cases after that. That's the only cases that I would take for the next 15 years. And that caused me to look at, the whole criminal justice system with a very different eye, like Atticus Finch might have.
Yeah.
And I went back to school, got a master's in social work just so that I could deal with my clients in a more holistic and complete way. It was what I wanted them, if they came into my presence and I was going to deal with this person, when they left my presence, I wanted to at least give them a chance to get out of the cycle of reoffending and punishment and reoffending and punishment. And I have to say, my dad would pat me on the back. I have to say that even today, there are people that'll walk up to me and say, "Mr. Martin, when you rep when you represented me, it was the last time I got in trouble." And it means a lot to me.
Yeah, I can definitely tell how significant, your work is to you and making a difference in people's lives. I mean, it's definitely a driver for you. Do you miss any of the old times and the fun that you had with the boys?
I got my memories. No, no. When I came up here, there weren't many Taoists, and so I started attending Buddhist services. Now, Buddhism is all about meditation. And I got to tell you, just like everybody else, who says that it's hard, for me, there were fits and starts
Mhm.
as well. I mean, I'd meditate for, a couple of weeks and then not. And then I'd get on myself and feel guilty and then go back and the like. So there was these fits and starts for some time. I had very wrong ideas about what meditation was until I got a coach. When I got a coach, everything became consistent and I understood, and he helped me to understand what meditation really was. And, there's no, if you understand what it is, there's no struggle to it. And then they called on me to go into a 2 year teacher program. I did that. And so now, 2015, I retired from day to day lawyering. I still do some pro bono work. And I devoted myself to teaching meditation.
If somebody wants to start meditation, there's so many, I mean, right now with social media and TikTok and the internet and all that stuff, meditation is talked about all the time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know sort of what's legitimate meditation, or does it matter at all? Because you can get a YouTube video, it'll give you guided meditation. But if somebody really wants to start and practice, doing that Wu Wei, is it
Wu Wei.
Wu
Wu
Wei?
Wei.
Sorry, I will remember Wu Wei kind of thing. What should somebody do?
Good question. The first thing they need to really ask themselves, in a very serious way, is what is my goal? Now, if my goal is to do nothing more, well, I don't mean nothing more. If my goal is to learn how to relax more effectively, and you go down one route. If it is, simply to de-stress, there are other things you can do. I mean, there's breathing techniques and breath work that
Mhm.
you can do. That, like, if your goal is to lead your best life,
Mhm.
okay, then, I mean, let me back up. If your goal is to go to a different state of mind or enter a different dimension, and I don't know much about that, but I know that that is transcendental meditation, means that you transcend
Mhm.
into another state of being or mind. And I don't know much about that, but that you would follow transcendental meditation and chanting and having mantras and the kind of thing. But again, if your goal is to lead your best life, then what you want to do is you want to reconnect with your authentic self. What do I mean by authentic self? Um, that's it's a hard question, but uh, let me say this. If you don't have a fundamental belief in the inherent goodness of humankind,
Yeah.
if you don't have a sense that underneath the fears and the conditioning and everything else is a consciousness that wants to connect either with other folks in a deep way or even with the divine or some kind of spiritual connection, if you don't believe that underneath, the conditioning that exists, then I don't know that meditation would give you, that you would have the perseverance or the even desire to want to take on meditation. What you should do is start jogging or take on some other things that cultivate beauty and awe and happiness in your life.
Yeah,
But
but I'd say I'm starting to
yeah, that's
because I
okay.
want to talk about like it's not you talk about TM and all that stuff. That's sort of what I do,
Uh-huh.
and it is difficult because of the expectation you set with it to transcend. I don't
Right.
always transcend, but you're absolutely right about this whole notion of people's desire to really believe in the goodness of the world and
Agree.
connection, right? And connection is so important, but you have so many people that went through trauma and are jaded that they can't get themselves out of their own way. I have people around me, which is
Mm-hmm.
probably not the best because you want to have people that vibrate at your frequency, but there are people around me that have a disdain for people. They say, I hate everybody. They're angry and all that stuff. And I know it comes from them. And there's nothing that I can do to shake them. It's not working. They have to figure it out themselves. And then they create this narrative for themselves of how bad everything is, how everything sucks, and the world is against them, kind of thing. And but they still take no action and don't and are closed off
Right.
to anybody giving them anything. Is there anything
Yeah.
that you're able
Yeah.
to do for those
No, I
people?
get that. I get that. So, what I would say is that those people are very attached to their suffering. I mean, there is something that we get out of our victimhood, and they are very attached to it. And if they don't have a desire to change the channel, if they don't have a desire to change the channel, then meditation is not the right course for them at this time. If they have a desire to change the channel and they really do want to, if they recognize that I am attached, that this is just uncomfortable. It's like when you hold a grudge. There's a lot of internal suffering that goes on inside of you. And one of the practices of forgiveness that meditation teaches is that you have to recognize your own suffering of holding on to the grudge and decide that you don't want it anymore. I don't want to feel this way anymore before you're ready to let it go. And so for those folks, it might be therapy. For those folks, it might be getting into a different environment where they are affected by kind people. They have kind experiences. It's like my wife, who was a Bible literalist, and now we've joined this very progressive church. When she first came there, and she's a very good woman, but she was in a very Southern Baptist evangelical anti-homophobic church. And when she came to my church, we're a very accepting and open and affirming church. And so she came in kind of begrudgingly and said, well, it is a sin. It's sinful. How do you deal with that? And then it came, well, I suppose that you can hate the sin but love the sinner. And then slowly, when she started to meet some folks and saw that they were wonderful people and some of the gay couples in our church, she really became friendly with them. And now she goes, I don't understand how I ever felt that way. Love is love. So exposure, just to the things that you fear, can be the therapy that you need. But there has to be a recognition that I am attached and addicted,
Yeah.
sometimes even addicted to my suffering before you want to let it go. But to
So,
answer your question,
mhm.
the kind of meditation that I teach is a meditation where the instructions are very simple. It's simply this. Form, wait, are we okay on time?
Great. Yeah.
Okay. So let me ask you this. I think this is a great example,
Yeah.
Len. You have had the experience of really wanting to listen to somebody. And as you're listening to them, your mind drifts away. And then at some point, you realize that you're not listening to them.
How did you know that? That happens all the
It
time to me
happens
with
all
my
the time.
ADD.
Yeah, right.
But I have to control it. And
Right.
yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Or you're reading a book and you go 3 pages and you don't remember a single word you just
It
read.
happens to me all the time. I'll tell you one other thing. Maybe this is an ADD thing, and people can let me know. If I'm in a space, like let's say I'm in a restaurant, and you and I are having a conversation, we're sitting across from each other. My brain picks up, or my ears, I guess, pick up different conversations. I'm trying to block it out, but it's extremely difficult for me. And it's very distracting where I lose focus in our conversation as well. That
Well, that
happens.
happens to me too.
Yeah.
It happens to everybody.
Okay.
Maybe with ADD, it happens more frequently and more intensely.
Hmm.
But everything, any of my students that have that, any of my students, and I don't mean to say this lightly, but many times some of my students will come and they'll say, I have ADD or ADHD, and even say I've been diagnosed with it. And then in our sessions, they learn that what they thought was weird stuff was real common stuff. And all of a sudden, when you find out that so many people, I do it, I feel the same way. I will read 3 pages and not remember what I did. I will stop listening to people. It happens to me. Um, but but you notice that when you realize that you're not listening, there does come a time when all of a sudden you go, "Oh, I haven't heard a word he said in the last 2 minutes," right? Right?
Yep.
At that moment, it's almost as if there's a little sensation of startle, right? A little feeling
Hmm.
like, "Oh," right?
Yep.
That's what we call waking up in meditation. That's the moment of mindfulness right there. That's when your mind woke you up and brought to your attention what you were doing. And then usually it's followed by a lot of judgments and beating yourself up, and how am I going to get him to say it over again? And how am I going to let him know I wasn't listening and all this kind of stuff? And then you go back eventually to listening. Okay, we understand that, right? The instructions in meditation are virtually the same. Virtually the same. So if you have had done that, if you've done that, then you have meditated, because the instructions are form an intention to put your attention on this candle. In 20 seconds, your mind is going to run off and you're going to start thinking about the stove's on, what am I going to have for dinner? What did that guy say yesterday? I should have done this. I got to do that. All that stuff. Your mind's going to go nuts. But because you created an intention to pay attention to the candle, your mind is going to wake you up in a little while and go, oh, it was my
Yep.
intention to pay attention to the candle. Then, then you have this flood of judgments. But eventually the flood of judgments stops. And finally you go, let me put my attention. The instructions are when you can bring your attention back to the candle and begin again. So this will happen again. So in 10 minutes, it may happen 15 times that your mind wanders, you notice, you come back. The idea of beginning again is a neurological message to your brain that you're okay. You are telling yourself that what I just experienced is okay. You're
Yeah.
giving yourself permission. So let's look at what happened. You woke up. So now you felt what it feels like to be awake. Then you became intentional. You started noticing all the judgments. So now you're noticing your thinking. It's different to have a judgment than it is to notice that I'm having a judgment. is two different things.
Right.
From the place of having the judgment, I have no control. From the place of noticing that I had a judgment, I have some say in the matter. So this simple exercise teaches us not only that our brain has its own mind, but it also teaches us that we are capable of watching our mind.
Yeah.
The more we experience watching the mind, the more we become skillful of getting out of the river of consciousness and going up on the bank. Now, here's the kicker. Here's the kicker. From the place of being in the river and floating on a twig, you are subject to the river. If it's calm, your life is calm. If it's white water, it's white water. If it's a waterfall, it's a waterfall. You got no say. From up on the bank, watching yourself on the twig on the river, that's where, when people talk about the calmness and the stability and the peace of meditation, that's where it is. It doesn't mean that you're still not riding and still not going through the roller coaster of life. But there is a part of you that has learned to back away and be objective, be the watcher. That part, on a spiritual basis, you might call your soul. And so as we become more and more familiar with the watcher, the observer, the more we understand that that is our authentic selves, that is the who we were before the conditioning. That is the goodness. And as we get more and more connected with that, we start to transform and transcend.
Yeah, it's really powerful. In TM, for instance, and based on the teachings that I received, it's that mantra. The mantra is that candle. So when your mind goes elsewhere, it's coming back to the mantra. So it sort of recenters you as well. I'm not sure about the transcendental part because I've used psychedelics before in my life, and I'm going to say that I've never had the experience meditating that I've heard that some psilocybin mushrooms will take me out. I never had the same thing.
No.
I think maybe if you're a monk, like you're saying, and you're doing it, maybe you'll get there at some point. So that's your life's journey. I wanted to ask you one more question about this.
Let me just challenge you on that.
Yeah.
Let me challenge you on that. Have you ever been on that metaphorical mountaintop when you're watching the most beautiful sunset and you lose yourself?
For sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Isn't that pretty damn close to the psilocybin feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
So they're doing a lot of research now on awe, AWE, awe.
Yeah.
And what they're saying is awe is the positive counterpart to PTSD.
Yeah.
When you experience awe, it changes your neurology.
It's interesting.
Now, you have to work at remembering it and you have to cultivate it because PTSD is about survival and it's a much more powerful force.
Yeah.
But awe is that transcendental emotion that if you intentionally put yourself in the place of experiencing awe from nature and beauty and the like, you will develop an ease of being able to attain that state. And you'll feel more and more awe in your life. And as you feel that, you'll feel more and more connected. Some really interesting research being done on that these days.
Yeah, that really is interesting because we work with a lot of veterans with PTSD and help them, with different substances as well to try to help them get there. But that's not for them to do something for the rest of their life. It's just like a quick shake to get you into that direction. I'm interested in your writing and your books and in being a professor of wellness. You talk about these diverse traditions of Taoism and Christianity and sort of navigating the two. They're not polar opposites. How do you I guess connect the diversity of the two into somebody's practice or compassion, harmony, the things that you're actually communicating to the world.
They're not different. That the bottom line is that they're just not different. They're expressed in different language and in different cultural norms, and different histories. So there are historical references. But once you get through that, it's not any different. Lao Tzu says that you should only be called to leadership. The Bible says Jesus went where he was called. Lao Tzu says if you step up to become a leader, when your work is done, you should step down if you want your work to endure. Otherwise, it becomes personal. When Jesus's work was done, he ascended. There are so many of the Daoism says there is no long without short. There's no tall without short. There's no front without back. The Bible says for everything there is a season. Sometimes, moving from a culture that is non-deistic isn't God-oriented to a culture that is God-oriented is challenging, I understand. But if you take the theology out of it and you just look at what are the life lessons,
That's it. Yeah.
the life lessons are the same. Now, if you want to know what I personally believe, I personally believe that some people say that we are spiritual creatures inhabiting a physical body, not physical bodies having a spiritual experience. I think that because I've gotten into neurobiology and workings of the mind and what consciousness is and the energy field of intelligence that we are. And this is just a working hypothesis. I'm not stuck with it. If there's evidence that comes on that says I'm wrong, I'm willing to alter it. But I just kind of feel like we are energy intelligence fields that connect because the entire universe is connected by gravity, which is an energy field. And so that there is a communication of intelligence and data that flows at least throughout the human race, if not the universe. I don't know, it's above my pay grade. But at least throughout the human race, there is a field of intelligence that flows.
Yeah.
And that these similarities are not accidental. They all come from the same database. There are pieces of art that occurred in Africa and in South America at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people say that it was aliens and that I think that it was because the artists were just drawing from the same database.
Yeah.
And that what makes sense to me. So really, if you just look for the base and the core, the roots of the intelligence, if you look for the data is the same.
Yeah, and coming from a sciencey place, 99.9% of us are identical. It's a 0.1% that makes us different genetically, and then we have the power epigenetically to turn those genetic expressions on or off. And I think theology itself, if you look at the different belief systems out there, religions, whatever, there's a lot of commonalities. There's a thread that goes through a lot of them. And I think the division that each one of these, I don't know why it started this way in the beginning, because if you look at, Old Testament kind of, and I'm not a student of theology at all, so you can point out, but I read a lot of the different texts way back when, and I found there's a lot of commonality. And I think the division comes with the interpretation of text based on somebody who's a human being who's reading something, interpreting it one way, and then trying to communicate how different we are than somebody else. Well, my beliefs are better than your beliefs. My beliefs are different than your beliefs. Instead of looking at this as a common human belief of, do on to others as you would want to be done to you kind of thing. And then let's divide for reasons of power, money, all these different things, control. And how do you actually bridge? Like you gave a perfect example with your wife about, I have this program belief system. I read it. I believe it. It's in my nature. It's in my theology. But you were able to break that belief system based on, examples of love and how common, this is among people. It doesn't matter, what color, what, sexual orientation, all that stuff doesn't matter. You're coming with the human intention. How do you get somebody, on a small scale, how do you get somebody on a larger scale to start seeing that and the uniting of the commonality of these people instead of let's look at what makes us different?
Yeah. So, it all goes down to the old serenity prayer. God, give me the strength to change what I can, the serenity to accept the things I can't, and the wisdom to know the difference.
Yeah.
So whenever, when I think about that, and I come to this conclusion that I have a responsibility to be my best self and to be a model of what's possible for humankind. Now, I don't mean it in an arrogant way, and I'm not putting myself out there as being perfect, but it's a constant process of rebalancing and readjusting and the like, because the only thing that I can be to somebody that, you know, the only thing I can be to somebody who is addicted to their suffering or doesn't want to, um, people like you describe,
Yeah.
is I can just be an example of what's possible for humankind,
Yeah.
and hope that you lead, and then there's always. Let me put it this way. I feel like I've planted a lot of seeds.
Yeah.
I
That's what I
don't
can do.
know how many of them will root, and I don't know how many of them will sprout. But
Or bear fruit, right?
or bear fruit. I don't know, but you just tell you a little story. Can I tell you a little story?
Yeah, yeah.
So a very renowned Buddhist teacher came to the area, and I wanted to go listen to him. And he was teaching the typical Buddhist thing about loving kindness, generosity, sympathetic joy, equanimity, all these things that we need to cultivate in order to live a happy and just life. And I must have been in a little bit of a cynical mood, so I raised my hand. And, teacher, you know, for 4,000 years, people have been teaching what you're teaching, and they've always been followed by a real small little band of followers while the rest of the world is running around with swords and torches. Why do we think it's going to be any different with your teaching? Ooh, I was really cynical. So he says, irrelevant question. The class chuckles. And I go, why? Why is that an irrelevant question? And he goes, because no matter what I say, you seem like you're a good person. Are you going to wake up and be different tomorrow? And I go, well, no. So he says, well, it's an irrelevant question. And I kind of sat back, and he goes, no, I will give you the real answer now. We do it because you never know when the tipping point comes.
Yeah.
And I just went, whoa. That's gonna be my theme. You keep going and you keep doing in spite of all of it. Like Anne Frank said, In spite of everything, I still believe that humankind is good. And you get up in the morning and you do what you do because you never know when the tipping point comes.
Yeah, I love that. Uh, wow, it's very powerful. All right, so Bob, I have a few questions I ask all my guests.
Okay.
It's a segue away from what we're doing, more music
Okay.
related, because I mean,
Sure, sure.
I'm interested in music. Do you remember, and if so, the very first concert that you ever attended?
Yeah.
What was it?
Simon and Garfunkel.
Cool. What area? Was that New York?
No, it was in Miami in the Jackie Gleason Theater on Miami Beach, a small venue of maybe 450 people. They were so young, and they were still doing. They were on tour with their first album, Bleecker Street.
Yeah.
So that's how far back that was.
Do you
Yeah,
remember what was the last concert that you attended?
the Rolling Stones in Madison Square Garden.
Yeah.
No, no, no. I went with my wife to see Tim McGraw and his wife
Okay.
here in Greensboro.
Yeah.
She's a country western person.
Yeah. Um, Another music question.
Mhm.
For next year, you can only listen to 5 albums. You
Ooh.
don't have to name the actual album. It could be a Simon Garfunkel album or something like that. What would be those 5 albums?
Tropical Chill. Um,
Name the artist just in case somebody doesn't know.
oh, I don't know any of those artists. I just listen to them all the time.
Okay.
It's electronic chill
Yeah,
music,
Tropical Chill. Okay.
DJ,
Got it.
electronic chill.
All good.
I just, I love that stuff. Mostly covers. Uh, um, Acoustic covers,
Okay.
okay, by modern artists. Um, um, what was that little town in California where Mama Cass was with all the other people were like hanging out at each other's houses and
Laurel Canyon?
huh?
In Laurel Canyon?
Laurel Canyon.
Yeah.
I listened to
I live right by there, so that's what I know.
I would listen to an album called Laurel Canyon Sings.
Cool.
Um, I I don't know. I'm so eclectic. I mean, I don't these days I tell you what I do is I listen to so much music that now Spotify sends me the Discover Weekly.
Yeah.
And that's what I listen to because it's always right on and it's always new people and I
I'm
don't really
surprised no
follow
Frank
them. I just
Sinatra based on your
Oh, Sinatra. Yeah, the Rat Pack. The Rat Pack.
Exactly.
Absolutely the Rat Pack.
All right, we'll leave it at that. That's fine. So last final question I ask all my
Mhm.
guests. Please describe what your room looked like growing up. And you can pick any room that, brings a memory into your life.
Yeah, it was it, well, it's hard to say. The one that comes to mind, I don't know why. There was the room in the trailer. That doesn't really come to mind. Well, the one that comes to mind was there was a single bed, one window at the foot to the left, one window in the middle to the right. The bathroom was behind me, and there was a little wooden desk and a tiny closet, and that was the whole room. Very small little room.
Nothing in the walls, no posters, no nothing like that.
No,
Got it.
no, it was too small. The windows took up all the walls.
Got it.
It was just a tiny little wall or tiny room. I don't know why that one comes to mind.
Well, that's the one.
Yeah.
Where can people find out more about you? Where can they engage with you and your teachings and everything else?
Well, everybody asks me about meditation, so I put together a 40-page primer
Mhm.
on meditation, and it's a free downloadable ebook. Absolutely free, no obligations. I've got that one, and I got another one where I picked up 25 de-stressing relaxation tips from around the internet with links that you can learn in 5 minutes, like, square breathing or 4-8-12 breathing, and all these 25 tips from around the internet. Those 2 ebooks, you can download them. You just go to my website, awiseandhappylife.com. And you can learn more about me there. And there's some information about meditation. And there's if you find the resources, there's 56 gigabytes of downloadable guided meditations, documents, explanations, practice sheets, all kinds of stuff.
Amazing. And for my audience, thank you so much for hanging in and listening. I hope you found this powerful and interesting as I did. And
this
thank
is
you.
Wonderful.
Yeah, and thank you so much for my audience for leaving wonderful feedback. I love the feedback that I get, not only just reviews of stars, but anything I can do to learn how to improve. So thank you for that. And thank you for buying the book, Making Cannabis Personal. Bob, I really want to thank you. This has been enlightening. I really appreciate your time and energy and what you're doing. I think putting out great energy in the world it really resonates and vibrates with so many people and lifts everybody in the world. So really appreciate what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you again for having me. And, before you go, you deserve some thanks too, because putting a podcast together is no little feat. It's a lot of work. And what do you do it for? So that people like me can have a platform. And that's got to be an act of love. So thank you for that.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Take care.
Hey everyone, thank you for watching and listening. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button, share this episode, and hit that bell. Like, comment. I so appreciate that. And check me out on social under Len May or Len May DNA. Find out more on LinkedIn or lenmaycoaching.com. And remember, everything is personal.